Jujutsu Kaisen is officially over and there is so much to talk about, such as Sukuna's rebirth and him going north, Kenjaku being alive and potentially starting the merger once again, what is going on with Tengen and the Culling Game, what's going on with Yuta and his new body, the reveal of the strongest grade 1 sorcerer, Megumi's domain expansion, Yuji being the new honored one, and of course Gojo's grave and what they've done to his body. There is a lot to break down and explain of Jujutsu Kaisen's ending and a lot of questions which people have been asking, rightfully so, and I'll be doing that all in this video. So let's just get right into it. Be sure to leave a like, it helps out a ton, thank you, and of course be sure to subscribe for a ton of consistent and quality Jujutsu Kaisen content just like this. Less than 10% of people who watch my videos are subscribed, so if you love Jujutsu Kaisen, I assure you, you won't regret subscribing, and of course, the more matter to come doing, man. Alright, so there's many plot points to talk about with Jujutsu Kaisen's ending, and the first thing we have to talk about is the fact that yes, as far as everything is considered with Sukuna's fate, he is indeed dead and he has gone to the afterlife. There is still one Sukuna finger left, but as was explained after Yuji defeated Ryoma and Sukuna, because there's only one finger's worth of power left in the world, that doesn't have enough power to sustain Sukuna's soul, since the other 19 fingers or 95% of Sukuna is in the afterlife, so that means Sukuna can never be brought back. There's some pretty interesting theories that maybe if Yuji eats that finger, because Yuji has such a deep connection and resonance to Sukuna's soul, it would awaken that 5%, even though it shouldn't be possible since his soul is no longer tethered to this world, but maybe through Yuji's resonance of Sukuna, it could bring it back. But of course, Yuji's never going to do that unless there's a Jujutsu Kaisen Part 2 for whatever reason, and we get to see that happen for some circumstance. But other than that, yes, Sukuna is dead and he very likely will rebirth and have a new try. He is going to go north and he's going to be reborn anew, as was discussed when Gojo died. And we know in Jujutsu Kaisen for a fact reincarnation does exist, so Sukuna's soul will be reincarnated once he's done with his trip in the afterlife, and maybe, just maybe, we could see the reincarnation of Ryoma and Sukuna exist in the current world, just as we saw his twin brother exist, which is Itadori's father. In the same way, there could be a reincarnation of Sukuna. It doesn't mean he's going to have the same personality as Sukuna. It doesn't even mean he's going to be as strong as Sukuna, although it would mean he would have his potential. Simply all it would mean is maybe Sukuna would try again, and given his new philosophy after being defeated, he may turn out to be a good guy. The next thing to talk about is Satoru Gojo. What the hell is going on with Gojo? So it was never really said what happened with Gojo, as it just really wasn't talked about in the end. It's very strange how we got to see Tsumiki's grave and we got to see a lot of other characters' fates be discussed, but never Gojo, which is just so strange. He was, of course, talked about several times throughout this ending and these final 3 chapters, and even Yuji had that great flashback of Gojo, which did imply that yes, Gojo has passed away, since that was the point of it. Yuji is going to take over as Gojo's role, since now Gojo is gone, and Yuji is going to be one of the leaders, if not the leader of the next generation, right? We already see that happening with him talking to cursed users and even trying to recruit them and being that leader and role model figure. But as for what happened to Gojo, it does seem like he is just definitely dead. Otherwise, that final flashback would have been pointless, and given the fact that we don't see him and we get to see the conclusion of many characters, but we don't get to see Gojo's conclusion, he very likely is dead. And one of my own personal theories, which I did come up with when the Gojo vs Sukuna fight began, I said that it's very likely we'll get to see Gojo be buried right next to Geto. They'll actually be sharing graves, since now they have Geto's corpse. Maybe they could just bury him alongside it because Kenjaku died. But it does seem like Kenjaku's alive, which we'll talk about later. So as for Gojo's corpse and his grave, we don't really know what's going on there. We know that his parents are alive. This was confirmed in a recent Gojo leaflet, and it does seem like the Gojo clan is falling from power, so no, it doesn't seem like Yuta or anyone like that is taking over. But yes, Gojo, as far as we know, is confirmed to be dead and he is very likely buried. It's just strange how we never got a funeral, we never really got to see anyone talking about him. Of course we got to see a flashback, but that was usually thinking internally, and we never got to see a grave, and it was never even said what happened to Gojo's corpse, since something must have happened to it, since they still possess that. Now as for Kenjaku's fate, which I just talked about recently, this is something I'm going to deeply expand upon in my next video, which will be 4 crazy theories on Kenjaku and what is going on with him, what he's going to do, how he survived, and his future role in Jujutsu Kaisen. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that video coming out in 2 days. But just to briefly talk about Kenjaku's fate, it does seem like he's alive. There's tons of theories about it, such as Takaba resurrecting him with his cursed technique, Kenjaku having a backup body, Kenjaku making a binding vow, Kenjaku perhaps using either cursed corpse or a cursed object, or Kenjaku even using the secret 4th technique, which was confirmed by Yuki that he very likely does have this, which he would have gotten through the Uzumaki. Again, I'll be going into extreme depth for all these points and a lot more in my next video, but as far as Kenjaku is concerned, just know that for some reason he is alive. There are a lot of theories going around that maybe what we're witnessing is an illusion created by Takaba's technique, but I do want to remind you all that Takaba's technique quite literally does affect reality. It's not like it temporarily affects reality, it permanently affects it so. And you've seen this as his technique can even heal him or even change the substance of materials, and the fact that he's healed and it's a permanent heal, or when damage is done to Kenjaku and it's permanent soul resonance, permanent soul damage, it's not temporary. But it's pretty interesting how he did create a temporary audience when he did have that final battle with Kenjaku when they were making those jokes, but I do believe that the Kenjaku we're seeing is alive. Again, whether it's to do with Takaba or whether it's to do with Kenjaku himself, that will be discussed more in the next video, and as for whether he's an illusion or really there, that's something you're going to have to choose for yourself. And again, I truly do believe he is physically there. We can see a physical body and Takaba is talking to him. We've seen that Takaba's technique only sustains things that he thinks are funny, only keeps them real or active in those moments, and even when he was satisfied with his comedy duel with Kenjaku, the entire audience and the area around them went away because he was satisfied. He no longer needed to fill that void of comedy, but the fact that Kenjaku's there, and it's not like he's making jokes, it's not like he finds the situation funny or the scenario funny, Kenjaku is simply there and he's even annoyed at him, so it does lead me to believe that yeah, Kenjaku is probably alive. And as for whether Kenjaku will begin the merger or do something along those lines, since Tengen still does exist, the Culling Games are still going on, it does seem like that is a likely possibility and would be great if we ever get a JJK part 2. And that moves into the next topic. What is going on with Tengen and the Culling Game? It does seem like the Culling Game is still going on. Of course, it's because the Culling Game has no real way to end it. There is a way to end it if you kill all the players, but of course they're not going to kill all of the players that currently exist, so it seems like the Culling Game just sort of exists in this limbo. I imagine they probably made some more rules to bypass more of the other rules that are currently affecting them negatively, or maybe they even used the Tengen corpse which they had to threaten the Culling Game and blackmail the Kogane into making rules that further help them into sustaining it and not having it be such a problem. And we've seen this is possible since Kenjaku did this twice when he created two rules that directly opposed the other already existing rules and contradicted them, but he was able to do it by blackmailing the Kogane. It could even be possible that they eventually find a way to use the Tengen corpse that they have to forcefully end the Culling Game at some point in the future, which of course would be dangerous, since if they do that, then it means all the barriers around Japan and protecting and even other countries would all be destroyed, so they kind of need to maintain that. It's the whole reason they're maintaining Tengen using Sukuna's corpse. But as for what happens there, it would be pretty interesting. And of course, the fact that Megumi did sort of have Tengen inside of him, because he did have Sukuna inside of him, does lead it to be a possibility that maybe Megumi could do something with Tengen and the barriers and somehow affect it all in that way, because at one point he was connected to Tengen. But the Culling Game itself, it doesn't seem like they're ending there, and as was discussed in the final chapter, it seems like Yuji and Hana are going on a cleanup crew, just pretty much dispelling all of the cursed objects inside of the incarnated players. So just for example, let's say Ryu, Uro, Hazunoki, these sort of players, of course Ryu and Hazunoki are dead and Uro is 50-50, we don't really know what's going on with her, but just using them as examples, they possess the bodies of innocent normal people who didn't want to be turned into cursed objects such as Tsumiki, but Kenjaku forcefully placed cursed objects and seals on them and awakened these players into them. So what they're pretty much doing is, let's say for example Hana and Yuji found Uro, they would just forcefully take the cursed object out of Uro using the combination of Hana's angel abilities and Yuji's new soul powers to just rip them apart. Because remember, Yuji's soul abilities specifically will work on anyone, but they're extremely effective against incarnated players, as we saw against Ryoma and Sukuna. And unlike Ryoma and Sukuna, all these other players didn't take a bath or break the soul of their vessel, so it's going to be extremely easy for even Yuji to do it alone. You add on Angel's technique to do the final touch, and that is pretty much what's going on with the Culling Game players. It's a bit sad and cruel because pretty much you're not necessarily ending the life, but you're in a sense ending the life of these incarnated players, but it does make sense since you do want to free the innocent people whose lives were also lost because of this. It's a bit strange, but we'll see how that all goes. And this does lead into the next person, Itadori Yuji. It does seem like, as I talked about in the beginning of the video, Yuji will have this leadership role, and Yuji being someone who has Sukuna's level potential, Sukuna who is stronger than Satoru Gojo. You add on top of the fact that he's got blood manipulation, which is a top 5 technique in the entire verse in terms of sheer potential, and that in and of itself is wild, because you could then make the argument that he has even more potential than Sukuna. Of course, if he's ever going to reach that potential is something that's up for debate, since you could argue that Sukuna only reached it because he's a natural prodigy, and maybe Yuji just isn't that gifted, but I do want to remind you that Yuji truly is a prodigy. To get this far, even though he was Sukuna's vessel, he is a prodigy, as was said by several other people. I mean, look at the fact that how quickly he mastered cursed energy in just a couple months, how quickly he mastered Todo's teachings, how quickly he mastered Black Flash. Like, the guy is no joke. He truly is a absolute demon in terms of just sheer talent and prodigy of jujutsu. I know Kusakabe chalked it up to Sukuna, but I do think he's downplaying the raw, god-given talent that Yuji has. And Yuji still has not even been a sorcerer for over a year, and he's got Cleaviness Mantle, he's got a domain expansion, reverse curse technique, reinforcement on special grade level, he's able to see his own soul and affect other people's souls, he's pretty much got Black Flash on command. I mean, not really, but pretty much he does. He's got blood manipulation. The guy is an absolute monster. If you give this guy 10 years to train, it's no longer a surprise that when Gojo said you're all going to far surpass me in the future, then yeah, he really likely will far surpass Gojo in just 10 years, or you could at least argue 20 years, you know, because Gojo went from being as strong as he was in the beginning of the hidden inventory mandatory arc to as strong as he is now in only 11 years. So if you give someone who has more potential than Gojo and has 2 top 5 techniques on top of that, if you give this guy also 11 years to train and he's at a much better starting point than you, and on top of that you give him maybe an extra 10 more years, let's say it's 20 years or 30 years into the future, it's not going to be shocking when Yuji is far above Gojo. I mean, far above it. It's not that Gojo and Sukuna are weak, but simply it's just that these new sorcerers are all extremely young and they've all been pushed given circumstances to this extreme level already at the insanely young ages that they're already at. So Yuji will be the next leader and honored one of the generation. If not, he already sort of is that role right now, as we're seeing in Jujutsu High. And of course with Megumi, it does seem like Megumi did retain the 10 shadows, as was said that when Sukuna transformed into his Heian form, Higuruma theorized, and it's not confirmed since this is just Higuruma's own guess and thoughts, but he says that it's likely that after the damage from Satoru Gojo and the death of Mahoraga, Sukuna very likely has lost the ability to use 10 shadows, which does seem to be true since we never saw him use it even once after the Gojo vs Sukuna fight. However, we see Megumi then use the 10 shadows on Sukuna during Sukuna vs Yuji, and Sukuna says that his, again specifically, he says that his 10 shadows is still functional, clarifying that there is a difference between Sukuna's 10 shadows and Megumi's 10 shadows, which is a bit odd since it contradicts what Sukuna said when he was talking to Mahoraga, where he said to Mahoraga, "You're no longer Megumi's shadow, you're my shadow." Again, it's all a bit tricky since maybe Sukuna saying this is implying that this Mahoraga is different from the one Megumi had, and because it was Sukuna's Mahoraga that was destroyed, Megumi may still have his Mahoraga. Mahoraga is the one that's up in the air, but as far as all the other Shikigami that Megumi has, he still has all of them, and you add on to the fact that he does for a fact have Cleaviness Mantle just as Yuji does. Now if he's awakened or not, that's a completely different topic, but he does have the technique just as Yuji had it after Sukuna left his body. Of course it took a month for him to actually awaken it, and not only that, but he has far more of Sukuna's potential than Yuji. Of course it's a bit tricky since Yuji does have that potential since he's tied to Sukuna in a much more deeper way than Megumi was, since he is related to Sukuna as he is the son of his reincarnated twin. It's a bit complicated, but it does work like that. But you could argue that maybe Megumi would have even more of a connection to Sukuna, since if you account for the total time that Sukuna was transformed in Yuji's body, it doesn't even make more than an hour. It probably doesn't even make more than 30 minutes that he was fully transformed in Yuji's body in total. And remember that most of the time in Yuji's body was as 3 fingers and then as 15 fingers. Compare that to Megumi, who had 20 fingers of Sukuna the entire time, and it wasn't like Yuji, who only had Sukuna's body, soul, technique, and cursed energy be pressed onto Yuji's own body and soul with that mere 1 hour that Sukuna transformed into his body. No, Megumi had more than a mere hour. He had a month and a half worth of time of him being fully transformed in Sukuna's body. Compare that 1 hour of Yuji's to a month and a half of Megumi, where it's even more because it's not 15 and 3 fingers, it's 20 fingers, and Sukuna's soul was deeper pressed onto Megumi's body. His technique was further linked to Megumi's body. And why is that the case? Well, it's because Sukuna took the bath and further submerged Megumi's soul, making Sukuna's own soul stronger. And this is not even getting into the fact that Sukuna incarnated his true form on top of Megumi's. So yes, at the very least, just as Kusakabe said for Yuji that he has access to all of Sukuna's potential and cursed energy and reinforcement because Sukuna was in his body, Megumi has that on times 1 million, and for even more of Sukuna's soul, cursed energy, and cursed technique, since for all the reasons as I said before. So best believe, give Megumi 10, 20 years, just like it was with Yuji, he is going to be a beast, since not only does he have the 10 shadows, of course Mahoraga's questionable, he will also have Cleave and Dismantle as well. And of course he will have the muscle memory of having an open domain expansion, since Sukuna did use an open domain multiple times on his body, multiple times, and we know from seeing from Yuji, you do retain all the literal memory and even the muscle memory of when someone is in your body. So both Megumi's mind and body are fully aware of how to cast an open domain. Of course he's probably going to need some training, but considering the fact that it was spammed in his body so many times, an open domain expansion, he should have no trouble at all pulling off the open Chimera Shadow Garden domain expansion. And of course, as for everybody else, it does seem like the conclusion for Yuta, Maki, Higuruma, and all those other characters are simply as we saw in the story. It doesn't seem like there's anything too much deeper than that, but yeah, it simply does seem like that's just all it is for them. And of course, last but not least, it was revealed very recently that there is a new Jujutsu Kaisen character called Usami, and I guess I shouldn't say that it's a new character since he was introduced to us at least only by name during the Kusakabe vs Sukuna fight when they were talking about who's the strongest grade 1 sorcerer, but we finally have his design revealed and even characters' thoughts on it. Mei and Gojo seem to hate him specifically because he is a lapdog for the higher ups, so they really don't like him. Kusakabe doesn't seem to have too much of an issue with it, since do remember Kusakabe was even on the side of the higher ups to kill Yuji in the beginning. He only sided with them because he owed Yaga a favor. But yeah, this is someone who seems to be at the very least as strong as Mei and Kusakabe, though of course it does seem like Kusakabe is the strongest of the grade 1s, but he is someone on their level. And that is pretty much it for the ending of Jujutsu Kaisen. There's still a lot more to talk about the ending, but I will be making more videos on this right after this video. So So once again, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on those videos that are going to be coming out very regularly right after this one. And if you have any questions about Jujutsu Kaisen's ending which I didn't answer, ask them in the comments and I'll try to reply to as many as I can. But if you did enjoy the video, be sure to leave a like, it helps out a ton, thank you. And of course, like I just said, be sure to subscribe for a ton of consistent and quality JJK content just like this. It truly is much appreciated, so thank you very much if you do. Thank you to all the channel members as well, it's always much appreciated guys, thank you so much. But that's all from me, have a great day and take care. Ya tebya ochen le bleu, delimen, paka paka.